How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Lucy in Minnesota, Melissa in Great Neck Shandor in the Bronx, Nancy in North Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Elvis in New York, Lorraine in Texas, Bill in mid-Missouri, Belle wending our way homeward, not yet Texas, Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Elle in Southern California, James in Indianapolis, Penelope in Anaheim, great to have you with us, Norm in 29 Palms, Alan in New York City. Opening a new tractate Shevuos, not Shevuos, the holiday that is coming up as we count the weeks, the weeks from Passover to Shevuos, the festival of weeks when the Torah was given. But Shevuos, which refers to oaths. Now, if we had covered together, and I hope people read it on their own, when we were shooting Guns N' Moses in the fall and winter of 2022, God, incredible how much time has passed, I had to skip teaching tractate Nedarim. Now, Nedarim is vows, and Shevuos are oaths. Very similar, not the same. The question, of course, is, because they're quite similar, somebody is uttering something where their words really matter and affect their actions, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You might have thought that these two things would be much closer together. Why are we right now learning Shevuos, the laws of oaths? And actually, it makes a lot of sense because we've been doing court cases. And in Sanhedrin, we talked about judges and court actions, litigation having to do with damages. And then we got into makos, which is lashes, which is court-ordered punishment. And there are many oaths which come into play in a court of law, in a rabbinic court, before a beis din. A house of judgment. When you come before a rabbinic court to get a judgment, two people against each other, perhaps in a financial matter, an oath can come up. And also a witness who is giving testimony, an oath can come up, where you swear before God that something is true. That's what we mean in halacha, in Jewish law, and Torah law, by a shavua, an oath. It is something that you are affirming or swearing before God that it is true. A neder, a vow, generally takes the form of, I declare that I will do or not do something. And usually it's negative, right? I declare that I will not drink wine, right? So that's I declare that I will not drink wine. I think that's the way a Nazir swears it. That's probably because Nazir is adjacent to Nedarim. Right, that's a neder, that I will abstain from something. Now, your words have strength. And Nina, let's share that link that I shared with you earlier. We can put in the comments in YouTube and Facebook. Yeah, here she put it in. It's kind of amazing. It's this chart. There's a link right there in the comments. It's kind of cool. I just put this in ChatGPT and I said, what's the difference between a neder and a shavua? And it just created the chart. I didn't even ask for a chart. I just asked for the difference between an oath and a vow, a neder and a shavua. Or between a shavua is an oath and a neder is a vow. But generally speaking, you can think of it like you vow, like at a wedding, right? I vow that I will take care of you, I will love you, I will be with you until the end of time. That's a promise of something you're going to do, and really you're vowing that you will, not leave that person, your beloved, in the lurch, so to speak. You'll be there for them. An oath is like, I swear in court that what I'm about to say is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's kind of easy way to remember. An oath is swearing before God. Now, sometimes you also say, I swear that I will do such and such, right? Or that I swear that I won't do such and such. Now, a neder and a Shevuah are very close to each other, right? And the difference is, right, with a neder, where it takes, where you know, let's say I will not eat apples for whatever reason, bli neder, right? I'm saying bli neder, and that's why we always say when we say that we will or won't do something, we add these words bli neder because it's not a neder, right? And what we're saying is I'm not. But if I was doing that, just for teaching example, right, I declare that I will not eat such and such, that would be a neder. Or you could say, I swear, right? I swear, you know, before Hashem that I will not do such and such. Now, the behavior that you're trying to create is the same, but one is made by declaration, the neder, and the other one is made by swearing before God about the truth of what you're now saying. It's almost like you're swearing the neder, but it becomes a Shevuah. Now, we'll get much more into the nuances of this. This tractate is about Shevuos, but when the question will be, you know, if I swear that I never ate an apple, right? This is just teaching, just talking. But if I swear that I never ate an apple, or that I didn't eat an apple yesterday, right? Then if I'm lying, I would become liable for making a false oath immediately, right? Because at the time of making the oath, it's already a lie. On the other hand, if I say, you know, I swear before Hashem that I won't eat an apple tomorrow, well, that may or may not come true. We won't know until tomorrow when we judge my behavior at that time, right? The other one is about declarations. Now, both of them, the Torah says that you have to be a person of your word, right? And so if you make a neder that you won't, you know, eat such and such, you have to live up to that. And if you don't, there's going to be consequences. But a Shevuah is this different form and covers additional situations that a neder wouldn't, and takes the form of I swear, right? I swear before God about the veracity of what I'm now going to say. It happened in the past, or didn't happen in the past, will happen in the future, or will not happen in the future. Okay, so that's generally what we're talking about in Nedarim, the difference between Nedarim, the plural of neder, a vow, versus oaths, Shevuos, or in the singular, Shevuah. And just while I'm mentioning it, that is the tractate that we skipped, and we're going to figure out how I'm going to make that up, because when we get to the Siyum in 2027, I want us to have finished all of Shas together. So I'm going to somehow, figure out an additional teaching time when my time gets much more my own, the movie's all done, etc. Maybe we'll do teach a class, and then at a different time in the day or right after, do a Zoom class for those who want to do it with me. Maybe cover a few pages a day. I don't know, but I will have taught the whole thing. Somehow, bli neder. I'm going to make that happen. Okay, now, we're in Tractate Shevuos. We're talking about oaths, and additional layer of complexity. We're gonna start talking about oaths and immediately digress. Very often we get into digressions in the middle of a tractate. This time, we're going to introduce oaths and right away talk about a completely different subject. Why is it being brought up here? Apparently, there was no logical place to put it elsewhere in the Talmud. And because of the kind of syntactical structure of how we first start talking about oaths, there's this additional teachings that have nothing to do with oaths that they're going to stick right here at the very beginning of Tractate Shevuos. So we'll keep it moving and try to just keep mindful that it's a digression. It's a digression. Okay, we start on 2a, as we talked about last when we started Tractate Makos. All tractates start on 2a. There's a lot of different reasons for it. Spiritually, it's like we're right in the middle of something, and it really feels like that when we're starting with digressions. Practically speaking, when these kinds of volumes first started being printed, not on scrolls, but in a book with pages, page 1 had more the print edition and who was responsible for the printing and where was it printed. And they started on page 2, and it's just a convention that we stayed with it. Okay. So we start page 2a, chapter 1, Mishna number 1, tractate Shevuos, the 26th volume of the Talmud. With regard to oaths, on an utterance of the lips, there are 2 types that are actually 4 types. So the Torah only specifies 2 types of oaths whose violation renders one liable to bring a sliding scale offering to atone for its transgression. A sliding scale offering is the type where, depending on your financial means, a rich person can bring a calf, a poor person can just bring a cup of flour type of thing. So that's the type of offering that we would bring, but the Torah specifies there are 2 types of oaths, and in reality, or the sages then derive what the Torah meant was that there are 4 kinds of oaths. How so? Where a person takes an oath to perform an action, and where he takes an oath to refrain from performing an action. So looking to the future, a person says, I swear that I will do such and such, or that I will not do such and such. Very similar to a neder, but now we've added the swearing before God aspect. And with regard to both types, where a person takes a note to perform some action, or where he takes a note to refrain from performing some action. And with regard to both types, the Torah explicitly mentions liability only for an oath pertaining to one's future behavior, right? The person swears that he will or won't do something in the future. Nevertheless, the sages derive that one is also liable for a violation of both types of oaths when they pertain to one's past behavior, when the person says he swears that I did something or I did not do something in the past. Accordingly, although only 2 types are explicitly mentioned in the Torah, the sages derive that there are actually 4 types of oaths. So having mentioned that structure, 2 that are mentioned in the Torah that are actually 4, when the sages look into the Torah and say the Torah must have meant this, we're going to look at some additional cases where the Torah only mentions a certain number of possibilities, but by implication, it's obvious that there are additional possibilities. So the Mishnah lists similar groups of laws with regard to cases of awareness of the defiling of the holy temple by entering it while one is tameh, ritually impure, or defiling its sacrificial foods by partaking of them while one is ritually impure. If a person came into contact with a dead body, or he helped to bury a body, or he came into contact with a woman who was menstruating, or with a creeping thing, something that imparts ritual impurity, which requires, depending on the type of ritual impurity, some kind of purification process, either immersing in a mikvah or waiting days, different kinds of purification processes. But if you are tameh, ritually impure, when the temple is standing in Jerusalem, you cannot enter the temple. So did a person know that he was impure and enter the temple anyway? Or maybe he didn't know that he was impure when he entered the temple. Or maybe he knew he was impure, but he didn't realize that where he was walking around in Jerusalem was actually into the temple complex. All right? Or eating sacrificial foods, right? A priest can eat parts of a sin offering. He has to be tahor, ritually pure, and the sin offering, the parts that's edible, has to be ritually pure. Well, what if he didn't know that he was impure? Or what if he didn't know that the food had become impure? With regard to cases of awareness of the defiling of the temple by entering it while one is ritually impure, or defiling its sacrificial foods by partaking of them while one is ritually impure, there are 2 types that are actually 4. It is prohibited for a person who's tameh to enter the holy temple or to partake of its sacrificial foods. If one transgressed either prohibition during a lapse of awareness, then upon becoming aware of his transgression, he is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. And the Torah specifies that one is liable to bring the offering only in a case where he had a lapse of awareness of the fact that he himself was tameh. So the sages derived that one is liable not only in those two cases, he didn't know, he forgot that he had become tameh when he entered the temple or when he ate the food, but also where he was aware that he was tameh, but he had a lapse of awareness that he was eating a sacrificial food or that he had entered the holy temple. With regard to acts of carrying out that are prohibited on Shabbos, right? On Shabbos, you can't carry something from a private domain to a public domain. We construct an Erev, this kind of encircling set of partitions in a city, which renders, that portion of the city all a private domain, so we can carry them. But in the absence of an Erev, you can't carry something from your private domain out into the public domain, or vice versa. But the Torah doesn't specify all the cases, and the sages say it is implied. So, with regard to acts of carrying out that are prohibited on Shabbos, there are two types that are actually four. On Shabbos, it is prohibited to transfer an item from domain to domain. And the Torah explicitly refers to only two cases, both of which involve an item being transferred from a private domain to a public domain. In one case, the transfer is made by a person who is in the public domain, and where the transfer is made by a person who remains in the private domain. In other words, one person is in the private domain, one is in the public domain, and one of them hands something to the other. So either the person in the private domain is transferring to the public domain, or the person in the public domain is transferring from the private domain to the public, or vice versa. So there's four directions in which this could go, right? I put it in your hand. I'm in the private domain and I put something in your hand in the public domain, or I'm in the public domain and I put something in your hand in the private domain, or you transfer to me, or I take, right? I take from the public domain into the private domain, or I take from the private domain into the public domain, right? The Torah explicitly refers to only two cases, both of which involve an item being transferred from a private domain to a public domain, where the transfer is made by the person who remains in the public domain, where the transfer is made by a person who remains in the private domain. And the sages derive that liability is incurred in these cases also if the item is transferred from the public domain to the private domain. Although only two types are mentioned by the Torah, the sages derive that there are actually four types. And also with regard to shades of tsaras, the markings on the skin that indicate that a person is a mitzora, has tsaras, the physical expression of a spiritual malady, no longer exists. There are two types that are actually four. The Torah specifies that if this mark of tsaras appears on a person's skin, the afflicted person must undergo a process of purification and then bring various offerings. Part of the classification of these types of tsaras is based on their shade of white. Two types of marks are explicitly mentioned in the Torah, and the sages derive that each of those two types has a secondary mark. Now, the Mishnah returns to the subject of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods. It elaborates on which offerings atone for different cases of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods. You see, we're in total digression. The tractate is about oaths. But because two oaths are actually four, we're looking at these other areas of the law where two are four. We're going to get through it relatively quickly, but we're starting with a digression. So it elaborates on which offerings atone for different cases of defiling the temple or sacrificial foods. In cases, and we're still in the Mishnah, in cases in which one had awareness, i.e. he knew he was ritually impure, tameh, and was aware of the sanctity of the temple or the foods involved at the beginning, i.e. before he transgressed. And he had awareness at the end. He knew the law and that you can't do this and that he was impure. Then he forgot. He did the prohibited act. And then he remembered, oh my gosh, I violated this law. So he had awareness in the beginning and he had awareness in the end. i.e. after the transgression. So he had a lapse of awareness of one of those two components in between while he actually made the transgression. This person is liable to bring the sliding scale offering. For cases in which one had awareness at the beginning, then he transgressed during a lapse of awareness, but he still had no awareness at the end. He was aware in the beginning that he was tameh, then he forgot. And then he violated the law, and he never realized that he violated the law. How is he going to atone? He doesn't even realize that he had a violation. Well, for him, the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary on Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur itself, suspend any punishment that he deserves until he becomes aware of his transgression. And then, to achieve atonement, he brings a sliding scale offering. He may never realize that he violated this prohibition. There are a lot of, if you look out in the world, there are a lot of Jews that don't know, they're violating laws constantly. They don't even realize that they're violating laws. Yom Kippur atones for them. And then when they become aware, then they have to get busy making an atonement. Right? For cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning, but he had awareness at the end. The goat whose blood presentation is performed outside the sanctuary, i.e. the goat of the additional offerings of Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur itself atone. As it is stated with regard to the offerings brought on Yom Kippur, one goat for a sin offering aside from the sin offering of the atonements. The verse juxtaposes the internal and external goats that are brought on Yom Kippur together to teach that for that which this one atones, that one atones. Just as the internal goat, i.e. the one whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary, atones only for a case in which there was awareness of the components of the transgression at some point, i.e. at the beginning, so too the external goat, i.e. the goat of the additional offerings of Yom Kippur, atones only for a case in which there was awareness at some point, meaning at the end. And for cases in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. The goats brought as sin offerings for the additional offerings of the festivals, and the goats brought as sin offerings for the additional offerings of the new moons atone. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says the goats of the festivals atone for the cases in which one never had awareness of the transgression, but the goats of the new moons do not. But if so, for what do the goats of the new moons atone? Now we're on page 2b. They atone for a ritually pure person who unwittingly partook of ritually impure sacrificial food. Rabbi Meir says, with regard to all the goats offered as additional offerings, those of the new moons, right, Rosh Chodesh, additional offerings that are brought on Rosh Chodesh, additional offerings that are brought on festivals, and the additional offerings that are brought on Yom Kippur, their atonement, i.e. the atonement that they effect for people, is the same. They all atone for the defiling of the temple by entering it while impure, or for the defiling of its sacrificial foods by partaking of them while impure. Rabbi Shimon would say, delineating his opinion as the Mishna expresses it above, the goats of the new moons, right, the monthly Rosh Chodesh additional offerings, atone for a ritually pure person who unwittingly partook of ritually impure sacrificial food. And with regard to the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, the goats of the festivals atone for cases in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. And the goats of the additional offerings of Yom Kippur atone for cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning, but did have awareness at the end. Now, with regard to these kinds of transgressions, entering the holy temple while impure, well, we don't have a holy temple anymore. With regard to partaking of sacrificial offerings, we don't bring sacrifices anymore. But have we walked in areas where we're not supposed to walk? It's a whole other set of laws. But here, it doesn't really matter that we don't have the Holy Temple anymore. We're learning which offerings were associated with atonement for which transgressions. We don't have this anymore in the world since the temple is not here. We're not bringing offerings, but our study of these laws replaces those offerings to the best extent that we can. Okay, the rabbis said to him, okay, hold on. Right. The rabbis said to him, what is the law with regard to whether goats consecrated for different days may be sacrificed, this one in place of that one? For example, if a goat was initially consecrated to be sacrificed as part of the Yom Kippur additional offerings, may it be sacrificed as part of the festival additional offerings instead? And Rabbi Shimon said to them, they may be sacrificed. And they said to him, since according to you their atonement is not the same, how could they possibly be sacrificed? This one in place of that one. And Rabbi Shimon said to them, they can be interchanged, since ultimately all of them come to atone for the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods. Now, we're not talking about the scapegoat, right, of Yom Kippur. There are other goats. That's what we're talking about, the additional offerings, the musaf. Right? We're not talking about the general goats that are brought, that one is sent to Azazel and one is sacrificed, and that these, atone for all kinds of sins of the whole people. Here we're talking about very specific goats that are brought to atone for problems that may have come up with regard to other offerings that were brought in the Holy Temple, because somebody entered when they were not pure, or a priest ate part of a sin offering when he was not pure or it was not pure. The rabbi said to him, what is the law with regard to whether goats consecrate? Rabbi Shimon said to them, they may be sacrificed. Since they were set aside for similar purposes, just different categories, but on different days, if they exchange, they still affect that atonement. They said to him, since according to you, their atonement is not the same, how could they possibly be sacrificed, this one in place of that one? Rabbi Shimon said to them, they can be interchanged, since ultimately all of them come to atone for the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, a tradition of his opinion that differs from the way the Mishna expresses it above. The goats of the new moons atone for a ritually pure person who unwittingly partook of ritually impure sacrificial food, and the goats of the festivals exceed them, as they atone both for a pure person who partook of impure sacrificial food, and also for cases of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. The goats of Yom Kippur further exceed them, as they atone both for a ritually pure person who partook of ritually impure sacrificial food, and for cases of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. And they also atone for cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning, but did have awareness at the end. The rabbis said to him, what is the law with regard to whether goats that were consecrated for different days may be sacrificed, this one in place for that one? And Rabbi Shimon said to them, yes, they may be interchanged. They said to him, if what you say is so, granted that the goats of Yom Kippur may be sacrificed on the new moons, but how could the goats of the new moons be sacrificed on Yom Kippur, when they will need to effect atonement for that which they were not consecrated for? And Rabbi Shimon said to them, they can all be interchanged, since ultimately all of them come to atone for these specific transgressions, defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, even if each one atones for a different case. New subject. And for intentional defiling, not a lapse of awareness, but somebody who knew he was tameh, ritually impure, when he entered the temple, that's intentional. He just did it. He said, well, I'm going to go in anyway. And then later he repented. I shouldn't have done that. What kind of atonement can he make? And for the intentional defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, both the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary in Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur itself atone. The Mishnah delineates how atonement is effected for other transgressions. For all other transgressions that are stated in the Torah, whether they are the minor ones or the major ones, whether they were intentional or unwitting, whether one becomes aware of them before Yom Kippur or he did not become aware of them until after Yom Kippur, whether they involve a positive mitzvah or a prohibition, whether the transgressors are subject to excision from the world to come, charis, or to the one of court-imposed death penalties, for all of these, the scapegoat sent to Azazel on Yom Kippur atones. So that's the cover-all for all of our sins. The scapegoat on Yom Kippur atones for us. Sadly, we don't have the scapegoat anymore, right? So we still have Yom Kippur, and we still have the laws of Yom Kippur, which we study on Yom Kippur. So we hope that that will be enough to make an atonement for us, so that none of us will lose our portion in the world to come. And that's what we learned, right, in the final chapter of Sanhedrin at the beginning, that we all have a place in the world to come. Israelites and priests and the anointed priest, meaning the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, they achieve atonement from the scapegoat equally. What is the difference between Israelites, priests, and the Kohen Gadol? The difference is only that the priests achieve atonement for their defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods through the bull that the high priest offers on Yom Kippur, whereas the Israelites, all the other Jews, achieve atonement for defiling caused by them through the goats that are sacrificed on Yom Kippur. Rabbi Shimon says, with regard to the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, just as the blood of the goat, whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary, atones for Israelites, so too the blood of the bull of the high priest, whose blood presentation is also performed inside the sanctuary, atones for the priests. And for all other transgressions, just as the confession made over the scapegoat atones for Israelites, so too the confession made over the bull atones for the priests. And that concludes our Mishnah, Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1. And we're about to finish the first page, so it was a long Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara inquires, and now we ask the Gemara right away asks the question, why are we talking at the beginning of a tractate about oaths, which is connected to Sanhedrin and Makos, because it comes up in court proceedings? Why are we talking about offerings and atonement for offerings and being impure when you're eating sacrificial food and Shabbos and carrying in and out? Why are we talking about this at the beginning of Shevuos? The Gemara inquires. Now, the Tana, meaning the rabbi who composed this Mishnah, the Tana is leaving tractate Makos, the tractate that precedes tractate Shevuos, in the Mishnah. What is distinctive about tractate Shevuos that he teaches tractate Shevuos right after tractate Makos? And the Gemara answers, it is due to the fact that he teaches in a Mishnah at the end of tractate Makos that for rounding the edges of his head, one is liable to receive 2 sets of lashes, one from here, the hair adjacent to the ear, and one from there, the hair adjacent to the other ear, one prohibition that includes 2. Now we're on page 3a. And for marring the edges of the beard, there are 2 edges from here, one on the sides of his face, and 2 from there on the other side, and one from below. One law that includes multiple prohibitions. So the Gemara explains, so as apparent from the Mishnah in Makos, this is a case where there is one prohibition for which one is liable to receive 2 punishments. And continuing on this theme, the Tan of our Mishnah here in Tractate Shevuos taught in the beginning of Tractate Shevuos examples of other sets of laws that can be formulated in the same manner. Beginning with regard to oaths on an utterance, there are 2 types that are actually 4 types. So the Gemara inquires, well, what is different here in Tractate Shevuos that the Mishnah teaches all the sets of laws that can be formulated, 2 that are 4, and what is different with regard to the chapter beginning the acts of carrying out that are prohibited on Shabbos, i.e. the first chapter of Tractate Shabbos, and the chapter beginning and the shades of different kinds of marks of tsaras, i.e. which is the first chapter of Negayim, where the Mishnah does not teach all of them, rather only the specific set of laws relevant to that tractate. Why are we learning these laws relevant to Shabbos and tsaras here? And the sages say in explanation, since the passages of oaths and the liability based on one's awareness of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods are written together in the Torah, Leviticus 5, verses 2 through 4, and they are also similar to each other in that they can both incur liability to bring a sliding scale offering, the Mishnah therefore taught both of them together here. And once it already taught 2 sets, it continued and taught all of them, right? Just because they're structurally similar, they were all brought here. And the Gemara inquires further, Tractate Shevuos opens with reference to oaths, but then proceeds to explain the cases of one's awareness of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods, returning to discuss oaths only in chapter 3. We're not going to get back to oaths until chapter 3. Why? And the Gemara explains, since the cases of one's awareness of the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods are relatively few, the Tana addressed them directly and dispensed with them, and then afterwards returned to teach the laws of oaths, which have many more and extensive details. The Mishnah taught, with regard to oaths of an utterance, there are 2 types that are actually 4 types. And so the Gemara now explains the 2 types are where one states, on my oath, right? Again, oath has this aspect of swearing. On my oath, I will eat and where a person states, on my oath, I will not eat. Right now, he's talking about future behavior. So if he violates either oath, which had that aspect of swearing in it, that's why it's an oath and not a neder, a shavua and not a neder. So if he says, on my oath, I will eat or I will not eat, then if he violates either oath, he is liable to bring the sliding scale offering as an atonement. Now, these two types are actually four types because they also include the cases where a person falsely states, on my oath, I ate such and such, or on my oath, I did not eat such and such. Now, at the moment of speaking, it's either true or not true. So if it's false, then he immediately becomes liable to bring that offering, the sliding scale offering. The Mishnah continues, with regard to cases of one's awareness of the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, for which one is liable to bring a sliding scale offering, there are two cases that are actually four. And the Gemara explains the two cases are where one's lack of awareness of the fact that he was ritually impure, tameh, led him to eat sacrificial food, and where one's lack of awareness of the fact that he was tameh led him to enter the temple. These two types are actually four, because one is also liable where he was aware that he was tameh, but he had a lapse of awareness that he had entered the temple or that he had eaten sacrificial food. Now the Mishnah continues with regard to the acts of carrying out that are prohibited on Shabbos. There are two types that are actually four. And the Gemara explains the cases by using the analogy of a poor person who remains in the public domain and a homeowner who remains in the private domain, and one passes an item to the other, right? The poor man comes to ask for some bread or money, and the guy who is the homeowner maybe gives him some bread or some money. Beautiful thing to do. That's giving tzedakah. It's a righteous act during the week. On Shabbos, if the one outside is in the public domain and the one inside is in the private domain, transferring an object is the problem. Of course, you can invite the poor man in and feed him, but you can't transfer an object from the private domain to the public domain. So the two types are the carrying out by a poor person of an item from the private domain to the public domain. This would be the guy who's outside reaches in and takes an object out of the private domain into the public domain. Or the carrying out by the homeowner. The one who's inside, he hands something, so his hand reaches from inside the private domain to outside the public domain and hands it to the guy outside. These two types are actually four because they also include the bringing in by the poor person of an item from the public domain to the private domain, and the bringing in by a homeowner of an item from the public domain to the private domain. Both cases, in all the four cases, there's a transfer. But in one, I put something outside, I put something outside, or I put something inside, or I take something from outside and put it in, or I take something from inside and put it outside. Putting in two different directions, or taking in two different directions. And the Mishnah's final example with regard to the different color shades of the marks of tzaras. There are two that are actually four, and the Gemara explains the two shades are of a wool white mark of tzaras known as a seis, and a snow white mark of tzaras known as a baharis. These two are actually four because they include a seis and its secondary mark, one which is similar to it, and a baharis and its secondary mark, one which is similar to it. And the Gemara asks, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah? It is neither the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael nor the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara explains, if one suggests that it is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, the suggestion can be refuted. As, doesn't he say, with regard to Shevuos, with regard to oaths, one is liable only for oaths pertaining to the future, but not for those pertaining to the past, right? In other words, I on my oath, I will not eat, Again, I'm just being ultra cautious, right? But if a person says, not me, but if a person says, on my oath, I won't eat such and such tomorrow, and then he eats it, right? So he would have violated his oath, and then he would be liable to bring the offering. That's the case that's listed in the Torah. So according to apparently Rabbi Yishmael, the Torah is only referring to that. And if the person says, on my oath, I didn't eat such and such yesterday, which becomes false immediately if it's not true that, if he's telling a falsehood about what he ate yesterday, then he has spoken an untruth. It's definitely a transgression, but he's not going to be liable to bring the offering for violating this particular transgression having to do with Shevuos. Right? So Rabbi Yishmael, we refute this. It can't be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Yishmael says that law in the Torah only applies to the future. One is liable only for oaths pertaining to the future, but not for oaths pertaining to the past. The Mishnah states that one is liable also for oaths pertaining to the past. So that would violate what Rabbi Yishmael has said elsewhere. And if one suggests that this opinion in our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, well, that suggestion can also be refuted. As Rabbi Akiva says elsewhere, for having defiled the temple or its sacrificial foods during a lapse of awareness of the fact that one is tameh, one is liable to bring the sliding scale offering. But one is not liable for having done so during a lapse of awareness of the fact that he entered the temple. He knew he was tameh, but he didn't know that he was in the temple. Rabbi Akiva would say that doesn't cover. This law in the Torah doesn't cover that situation. Now the Gemara answers, if you wish, say that the Mishnah expresses the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. It does express the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And if you wish, say it does express the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And how do we reconcile that contradiction? The Gemara elaborates, if you wish, say that the Mishnah does express the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And the intent of the Mishnah is that while there are 4 types of oaths, among them are types for which there is liability to bring an offering for one who violates them, and among them there are types for which there is exemption from liability for one who violates them. And if you wish, that the Mishnah expresses the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and the intent of the Mishnah is that while there are 4 cases defined by one's awareness of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods, among them there are cases for which there is liability, and there are cases for which there is exemption. In other words, you could say that it's even in keeping with Rabbi Yishmael, because there's 4 kinds of ways to transgress an oath. 2 of them incur liability for the sliding scale offering, 2 don't. But there are 4 ways to speak falsely when you swear that you will do or won't do, and when you swear that you did do or didn't do. Now we're on page 3b. At the very bottom. And so the Gemara asks, how can one say that the Mishnah teaches how can one say that the Mishnah teaches types for which there is exemption from liability? That's not what the Mishnah said. Right now on 3b. But the Mishnah teaches these cases similar to the different shades of tzuras, which indicates that just as there, all 4 of them are shades for which there is liability to bring an offering. In other words, you're going to become a mitzorah. And when you are finished being a mitzorah, right, and the disease has gone away, and you go through the purification process, and you're going to bring the offerings that a mitzorah brings at the end of the process. But the point is, you become liable to bring those offerings when you are declared a mitzorah. So too here, with regard to oaths and the cases of one's awareness of the defiling of the temple or its sacrificial foods, all 4 of them are cases for which there is liability to bring an offering. Therefore, this could not be consistent with Rabbi Yishmael's opinion about oaths or Rabbi Akiva's opinion about defiling the holy temple and its sacrificial foods. Therefore, the Gemara suggests a different resolution. Actually, the Mishnah expresses the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And while Rabbi Yishmael does not deem one liable for oaths pertaining to the past, that is only with regard to liability to bring an offering. But he does deem one liable to be administered lashes. So the punishment might be different. The consequence might be different for swearing a false oath about future actions versus a false oath about past actions. But either way, you've made a transgression. And this is in accordance with the statement of Rava. As Rava says, the Torah explicitly amplifies the prohibition of taking a false oath to be similar to the prohibition of an oath taken in vain. What is an oath taken in vain? That's different than a false oath, right? So if I say, I would never say, if a person said that he swears before God, right, that the moon is made of green cheese, and everybody knows, and everyone always knew, that the moon is not made out of green cheese. He's making a nonsense statement. That is a vain oath. And it can also be a vain oath if it's something that everybody knows is true. He swears, an oath before God, that the sun is shining right now, right? When all the people are standing outside under the sun. Everyone knows that the sun is shining. So this is an oath in vain because it was an unnecessary oath. Either unnecessary and not ridiculous because it's obviously false, but also unnecessary because it's obviously true. Those are vain oaths, as opposed to a false oath where it is a situation where an oath would be appropriate, but he lies. Okay, so Rava says, the Torah explicitly amplifies the prohibition of taking a false oath to be similar to the prohibition of an oath taken in vain, to teach that one is flogged for its violation. And it follows that just as an oath taken in vain pertains to the past and renders one liable to receive lashes, so too, taking a false oath that pertains to the past renders one liable to receive lashes. And the Gemara asks, well, granted that one who stated, on my oath I ate, but in fact he did not eat, or one who stated, on my oath I did not eat, but in fact he ate, he's liable to receive lashes, as this is in accordance with the statement of Rava. And also, if one stated, on my oath I will not eat, and then he ate in violation of his oath, he is liable to receive lashes, as it is a prohibition that involves an action. And in general, such prohibitions are punishable by flogging. But if one stated, on my oath I will eat, and in violation of his oath he did not eat, he performed no action. He violated his oath by doing nothing. Why should he be liable to receive lashes? We have a principle that lashes are not administered, with just a few exceptions, for the absence of an action, or even just for speaking words. But generally, we say that when you violate a negative prohibition that doesn't have a positive mitzvah to cure it, by committing an action, then you're liable to receive lashes. But if you violated something by doing nothing, you wouldn't. So how could we say that lashes would be triggered here? Right? It is a prohibition that does not involve an action. And the generally accepted principle is that one is not liable to receive lashes for violating a prohibition without performing an action. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yishmael disagrees with the generally accepted principle, and he holds that one is flogged for the violation of a prohibition that does not involve an action. The Gemara challenges this. Well, if so, then a difficulty arises between one statement of Rabbi Yochanan and another statement of Rabbi Yochanan. As Rabbi Yochanan says, the law is always in accordance with the ruling of an unattributed Mishnah. Since the Mishnah here is unattributed, therefore the law follows it. An anonymous Mishnah is the law. So this assumes that one is flogged for taking a false oath. Rabbi Yochanan should rule that is the law. That is the law. And there was a dispute between Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, that was stated with regard to one who said, on my oath, I will eat this loaf today. And the day passed and he did not eat it. Right? So he said he would do something and then he didn't do it. Would this trigger lashes? According to the generally accepted principle, no. According to this view of Rabbi Yochanan just expressed, maybe. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both say he is not flogged for taking a false oath. They disagree with the reason that he is not flogged. Rabbi Yochanan says he is not flogged due to the fact that it is a prohibition that does not involve an action, as he violates the oath by failing to perform an action rather than by performing an action. And the principle is, with regard to any prohibition that does not involve an action, one is not flogged for its violation. And Reish Lakish says he is not flogged for a different reason. He is not flogged because it is an uncertain forewarning, as one cannot forewarn him before he fails to fulfill the oath, because as long as the time remains in the day, he can still later eat the loaf and fulfill the oath. And then uncertain forewarning is not characterized as forewarning. Remember that for a warning to take effect, that will, like if you say, hey, if you eat that piece of pork, which is prohibited, you're going to be liable to lashes, and then he eats it right away in front of witnesses, right? So then maybe he's liable to lashes if that's the appropriate punishment for that situation. However, if you say he says, I'm gonna eat this thing tomorrow, then as the day is going on, you say to him, hey, listen, you need to eat that thing or you're going to be liable to lashes for violating your oath. And he does nothing. Okay, then remember the immediacy of a warning before the transgression that triggers lashes. But here you make the warning, a minute passes, okay, now he failed to eat, but he could still eat. And the immediacy of your warning and him, so presumably you could say, well, if we knew exactly when the day ends, right, exactly when the day ends, and then you warn him 1 second before the day ends and he doesn't eat, maybe then. But we don't know exactly when the day ends. We don't use, midnight as a change of calendar. We use dusk, nightfall. And we're not sure exactly when one day goes into another. That's why Reish Lakish would say uncertain warning, therefore cannot produce lashes. The Gemara resolves the difficulty about Rabbi Yochanan's contradictory statements. Rabbi Yochanan found another unattributed Mishnah, which holds that one is not flogged for a prohibition that does not involve an action. And he rules in accordance with that Mishnah. The Gemara asks, which other unattributed Mishnah did he find? If we say he found this unattributed Mishnah, as we learned in tractate Pesachim, about the laws of Pesach, but one who leaves over some of the meat of a ritually pure Pesach, the Paschal offering, the goat or lamb that was brought to Jerusalem, and then they sacrificed it in the temple, sprinkled some of its blood on the altar, then took it to the group that was registered to eat that lamb or that goat on Passover night. And then they would have to eat all of it that night, roasted, not cooked any other way. And then anything that was left over in the morning, they would have to burn. They couldn't eat it after the morning had come. They shouldn't have anything left over. It says don't leave any of it left over. But if some is left over, then you burn that. So what about that? But one who leaves over some of the meat of a ritually pure Pesach until the morning of the 15th of Nisan, and one who breaks a bone of a ritually impure Pesach are not flogged with 40 lashes. This is difficult. First, the Gemara explains how this Mishnah demonstrates Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Granted that breaking a bone of an impure Pesach does not incur lashes, as it is written, nor shall you break a bone in it. The term in it indicates that the verse refers only to a valid Pesach, but not to a disqualified one, such as one that is impure. I think when I read one who leaves over the meat of a ritually pure Pesach, it should have said one who leaves over the meat of a ritually impure, of a tamei Pesach, or one who breaks bones of a tamei Pesach. He is not flogged, right? So now as we continue the explanation, granted that breaking the bone of a tamei Pesach does not incur lashes, as it is written, nor shall you break a bone in it. The term in it indicates the verse refers only to a valid Pesach, but not to a disqualified one. But in the case, I read it correctly. But in the case of one who leaves over some of the meat of a pure Pesach, a Pesach that is tahor, that was valid for eating, what is the reason he is not flogged? Is it not because it is a violation of a prohibition that does not involve an action? And for a violation of any prohibition that does not involve an action, one is not flogged. What's going to be the problem? Yeah, but the Torah also says that if you do leave some of it over, you can burn it. It's a positive mitzvah that comes as a cure. The Gemara now questions this explanation of the Mishnah. But from where is it apparent that this Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi But from where is it apparent that this Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov? Rabbi Yaakov, how did he come into this? Who says that for violation of a prohibition that does not involve an action, one is not flogged. Perhaps the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And he holds that the reason the Mishnah rules that one is not flogged is due to the fact that the verse comes to position the positive mitzvah of burning the leftover meat after the prohibition of leaving over the meat. And one is not flogged for a prohibition whose violation obligates one in a positive mitzvah. But if there was no positive mitzvah, if it didn't say burn what's left over, if it only said do not leave any over, then maybe flogging would apply. That's actually where I was going to stop. I didn't give you the warning. Please get in your questions or comments now. And this is a good place to stop, because we have come basically to the end of page 3. So we'll continue with page 4 tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, but we're right in the flow. So let's try to remember where we are, right? That we're trying to understand why Rabbi Yochanan in one place says no flogging for violating a negative prohibition that involves no action, and yes flogging for violating a prohibition that involves no action. How are we going to reconcile that? And it seems like, well, he had unattributed Mishnas to rely on, but we'll pick up the flow there. So let's take some questions or comments. Yosef, in my ignorance as a youth, I swore to be like Samson and not touch alcohol, as I thought it would make me stronger spiritually. Would I be held to this despite my lack of understanding? I've grown in my faith, and I assume Hashem knows this and takes it into consideration. Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to avoid, getting ourselves obligated in anything. And as we know more of the law, we're more careful to avoid it. But you did not take an actual oath of Nazirus. You swore to do something based on your understanding then. Don't take my word for it, absolutely. You should consult a rabbi. But my understanding is no way did you obligate yourself to become a Nazir based on that very imperfect understanding. And in fact, did you say that you were going to, be like Samson? Well, be like Samson, I guess he was a Nazir all the days of his life, but still, you didn't understand what you were saying. So I'm sure that a rabbi could get you out, would say that it never took hold, but ask a rabbi, not me. Bill, so this is all by way of saying these 3 chapters are 3 chapters that didn't really fit neatly in any tractate, but they had to go somewhere, so Rebbe put them here instead of having a 3-chapter tractate named Miscellaneous? Yes. Yes. He wanted these things together because conceptually they go together. This 2 that becomes 4, even though obviously the part about Shabbos could have been in Shabbos, the part about the Mitzorah could have been in Negayim, the part about offerings could have been in Zevachim, where we're talking about offerings, but because they have something similar to each other, and as we've seen, digressions are so common in the Talmud, that here it's actually not such a crazy digression, since we are discussing them all together in the sense that, this 2 that becomes 4, does it work in one area, should it work in the other, etc. Renee, I did Nidarim with MDY, Rabbi Eli, where it's geschmack to do the daf. Well done, Renee. Well done. When I wasn't able to teach, you found yourself an alternate teacher and kept going. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Bill, so question on unnecessary oaths. So oaths in vain. Specifically, when the statement is generally known to be true, doesn't matter if the person you make the oath to knows it. Say Alice and Bob are having an argument. Bob is the sort of person who is convinced that the moon landing was faked. Alice, in frustration, says, I swear to you before God that Neil Armstrong really landed on the moon. Now, the overwhelming majority of the world knows that what Alice said is true. But Bob, for reasons known only to him and God, is convinced it is not. Does that make Alice's oath a vain one? Although as I write this, it occurs to me that either way Alice is up a creek, she's rebuking a scoffer, surely. I don't know because, you would say that most of the world accepts that the moon landing was not faked. I would agree with you. But it's not a small number of people who think that it was fake. And by the way, there's a third school of thought that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. But were they able with 1960s technology to broadcast that TV signal 25,000 miles and get it all to work perfectly on TV? Maybe what they faked was the TV broadcast, even though it really happened. Not crazy. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but it's not crazy, you know? Now, what's interesting is, what's Alice doing? How can she make that oath? She has no idea. She has no firsthand knowledge, right? She's just speaking in kind of exasperation. So unless, she was working for NASA at the time, there's a lot of issues here. We're going to get into more the nuances of that when we actually get into oaths. Bill, I think I'm Reish Lakish. The minute we have to say, if we knew exactly to anything, I'm immediately suspicious. Humans just generally aren't good at that kind of precision. Voila. Your question, your second comment answers your first comment. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All the best.